Doug Ford isn't waiting. Ontario's premier sent a strong message to the Americans. The province is moving ahead with a 25% surcharge on electricity exports to several U.S. states.
We will immediately apply a 25% surcharge on the electricity we export. We will not hesitate to shut off their power as well.
President Trump's trade war is heating up. The Canadian province of Ontario says it will slap a 25% surcharge on electricity exported to the U.S.
Doug Ford is not waiting. Ontario's premier delivered a blunt message to the United States. The province is moving forward with a 25% surcharge on electricity exports to several U.S. states. We will immediately apply a 25% surcharge on the electricity we export, Ford said, and we will not hesitate to shut off their power as well. As President Trump's trade war intensifies, Ontario has decided to hit back where it hurts. The Canadian province announced it will impose a 25% surcharge on electricity exported to the United States. Electricity rarely grabs headlines unless something goes wrong, prices soar, or the lights go out at the worst possible moment. This time, the disruption did not come from a storm or a cyber attack. It came from a political decision that sent shockwaves across the border. Ontario's move to raise the cost of exported power has forced cities like New York and Boston to face an uncomfortable reality about how dependent they are on Canadian energy. Beneath the surface of tariff talk and retaliation, a deeper issue is emerging. One involving grid stability, rising electricity bills, and a power struggle that could reshape the Northeast. Ontario made its stance unmistakable when Premier Doug Ford announced a 25% surcharge on electricity exports to the United States. The policy directly affects approximately 1.5 million American homes and businesses in Minnesota, New York, and Michigan. Ontario is not a minor supplier quietly offloading surplus power. It plays a crucial role in supporting U.S. power grids during periods of peak demand. That interdependence has long been viewed as a technical necessity, not a political weapon. But with the surcharge taking effect immediately, every kilowatt-hour flowing south from Ontario suddenly became 25% more expensive, turning a stable trade relationship into a flashpoint in a growing economic confrontation. The scale of the impact becomes clear when looking at the numbers. In 2024, New York imported 7 terawatt-hours of Canadian electricity, more than any other U.S. state, worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Over the past 5 years, Canadian Power has supplied roughly 11% of New England's total electricity load, according to ISO New England. That means daily operations across the region have quietly depended on steady cross-border energy flows. The New York Independent System Operator is interconnected not only with Ontario's Independent Electricity System Operator, but also with Hydro-Quebec, giving New York access to as much as 4,600 megawatts of imported power. Together, these connections form one of the most integrated international power grids in the world, built over decades to balance reliability and cost across borders. Premier Ford made clear that the surcharge is not symbolic. He said it will remain in place and could increase if the United States escalates further. He also warned that a full shutdown of electricity exports is still an option. Ontario's Minister of Energy and Electrification, Stephen Lecce, reinforced the message by stating plainly that the United States needs Canada's power, signaling that the province views energy as leverage in a broader dispute. Ontario officials estimate the surcharge will generate between $300,000 and $400,000 Canadian dollars per day, revenue the government says will support Ontario workers, families, and businesses. Ford estimated the policy could add roughly $100 Canadian dollars per month to the electricity bills of each affected American customer, a significant hit in regions already burdened by high utility costs. While Minnesota and Michigan were included among the affected states, the real pressure point lies farther east. Ontario's electricity is frequently resold within the United States, meaning the effects of a surcharge could ripple well beyond the states initially named, meaning price increases ripple far beyond the immediate border states into broader regional markets. New York's heavy reliance on Canadian imports makes it especially vulnerable, particularly during winter cold snaps and summer heat waves when electricity demand surges. Boston and the wider New England region also depend heavily on Canadian hydroelectric power during peak periods. Even a temporary increase in import prices forces grid operators to rely more on natural gas or other higher-cost alternatives, pushing those added expenses directly onto consumers. The timing of Ontario's move cannot be separated from decisions made in Washington. President Donald Trump imposed 25% tariffs on most Canadian goods after a one-month pause. While energy resources were subjected to a lower 10% duty, those tariffs triggered swift retaliation from Canada, which introduced its own 25% counter tariffs on 30 billion Canadian dollars worth of American imports, including dairy products, beverages, plastic, steel, and aircraft parts. In mid-March 2025, Canada expanded its response again, imposing 25% tariffs on an additional 88 billion Canadian dollars of U.S. steel, aluminum, and cast iron products. These measures were paired with formal challenges at the World Trade Organization, targeting both the Section 232 steel and aluminum tariffs and the broader trade actions. As the dispute escalated, grid operators on the U.S. side began preparing for scenarios that once seemed unthinkable. Both the New York Independent System Operator and ISO New England filed emergency proposals with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, requesting authority to collect potential import duties on Canadian electricity if directed by federal officials. Their filings stressed that strong legal arguments exist against applying tariffs to electricity and noted that grid operators are not designed to function as customs collectors. Still, uncertainty demanded contingency planning. ISO New England estimated that a 10% to 25% tariff on Canadian electricity could cost between $66 million and $165 million annually, costs that would ultimately be passed on to consumers. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission accepted the proposed tariff revisions in early March, making them effective March 1, 2025, and requiring both operators to submit informational filings every 6 months for 3 years if import duties are collected. That approval created a formal framework for dealing with energy tariffs, but it also signaled something more consequential. Political risk has entered a market historically governed by engineering realities and economic logic rather than geopolitical maneuvering. Grid operators have long warned that their systems are not built to absorb politically driven price shocks, and recent events have underscored that concern. Minnesota's response highlighted how impacts vary by state. Governor Tim Walz criticized the administration in Washington, warning that ordinary Minnesotans would be among the first to feel the effects of rising electricity bills. State officials also noted that Minnesota imports Canadian power only during certain months of the year, limiting direct exposure. Michigan officials offered a similar assessment, suggesting the immediate financial impact on customers would likely be modest because most of the state's electricity is generated in-state or secured through long-term contracts. Still, Matt Helms of the Michigan Public Service Commission cautioned that any disruption to cross-border power flows removes a layer of protection and increases vulnerability to large-scale outages, emphasizing that reliability risks go beyond simple cost calculations. The interconnected nature of North America's electric grid means electricity flows in both directions depending on demand, maintenance schedules, and price signals. The system was built on the idea that pooling resources across borders improves reliability and lowers overall costs, allowing regions to draw on surplus generation when needed. That integration, once considered a strength, now appears to be a potential weakness because it exposes grids to political decisions beyond the control of engineers. When tariffs and surcharges enter the equation, market stability becomes subject to abrupt policy shifts. And when President Trump announced that tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum would double to 50% effective March 12th, reportedly in response to Ontario's electricity, earlier that same day, Premier Doug Ford had suspended the surcharge after discussions with United States Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. whose name quickly became central to the negotiations. White House trade advisor Peter Navarro later confirmed that the proposed 50% tariffs on steel and aluminum would not move forward following Ontario's pause. The rapid sequence of escalation and reversal underscored how quickly trade disputes can spiral and how abruptly they can be defused, leaving markets to absorb the aftershocks. Despite the temporary suspension, Ford made it clear that the surcharge could return if tariffs were reinstated or expanded. He dismissed a one-month pause on certain vehicle and auto parts tariffs as inadequate, arguing that uncertainty itself undermines confidence and investment. Ontario's position as Canada's auto manufacturing hub adds another layer of exposure, especially if 25% tariffs on vehicles and auto parts are reimposed on April 2nd as previously threatened. The president granted a one-month exemption in early March to automakers including Ford Motor Company, General Motors, and Stellantis, a move that offered short-term relief but did little to ease longer-term concerns. Energy was not the only pressure point under discussion. Premier Ford publicly urged Alberta to consider imposing an export tax on oil, noting that the province sends roughly 3 million barrels per day to the United States. Nearly a quarter of the oil consumed daily in the U.S. comes from Canada, and about 60% of American crude oil imports originate north of the border. In addition, approximately 85% of U.S. electricity imports are supplied by Canada. Ford argued that a $1 increase in gasoline prices in the United States would carry swift and severe political consequences, framing energy exports as a powerful strategic lever. Canada's retaliatory tariffs, first on 30 billion Canadian dollars worth of U.S. goods and later on nearly 30 billion more, demonstrate that the conflict has moved well beyond symbolic measures. Formal challenges filed at the World Trade Organization introduce a legal dimension that could stretch on for years. Meanwhile, the president has threatened additional tariffs on Canadian dairy products, lumber, and vehicles, keeping the risk of further escalation firmly in play. Each new announcement injects fresh uncertainty into markets that depend on stability and predictability. For residents of New York and Boston, the consequences are immediate and tangible. During peak winter cold and summer heat, Canadian hydroelectric imports help stabilize the grid and keep prices in check. If those imports become more expensive or less reliable, utilities are forced to rely more heavily on natural gas or other generation sources with higher marginal costs and greater emissions. Even short-lived disruptions can translate into noticeable increases on monthly utility bills, especially for households already strained by rising costs.